Thank you, Danny. So as Danny said, I've taught a lot of different um, things throughout the years and worked in a lot of places. And my first experience with online instruction was actually in 2012. I started off with pre-made courses and eventually started to redesign them. And then when I worked at UCR from 2016 to 2019, I developed an online algebra workshop, which was very similar to an algebra course, like an intermediate algebra course, but it was only 7 weeks long, and we converted it from an in-person course to a fully online course. So this talk is mostly based off of my experience with that algebra workshop. Over the past few weeks, I've been taking my Math Success Center, which is primarily a tutoring center, and moving our services into an online environment. So if every now and then I'm a little tired, it's because I've been working like 20 days straight, which I'm sure some of you have been doing as well. So let's go ahead and get started. So common concerns with online courses. The instructor's role. What do I do now? I'm in an online class. I'm no longer doing lectures with my students. How does my role change as an online instructor? Academic integrity. We always have this concern even with in-person classes, but we know that sometimes when people become impersonal over the internet, academic integrity issues sometimes increase. So we often have to consider those things when we have an online course. Motivation and persistence. How do we keep our students motivated in the class, and how do we keep them persisting until the end? Accessibility. Do our students have access to the equipment that they're going to need to be successful? And ADA compliance, which in the current environment may be kind of in the back of our minds as we've made a quick transition online, but it is still very important, especially if your school is intending to continue online classes this summer or even potentially into the fall. So we'll start with the instructor's role and academic integrity. From my experience with online instruction, it requires a lot more administrative skills. As an online instructor, you spend a lot of time on your computer. You look at a lot of reports, right? So more time is devoted to monitoring the student progress and outreach. I know that even just with my experience these past few weeks with putting our tutoring center online, I have experienced a much higher volume of emails from students or my need to email students versus when we were doing our tutoring all in person. So in this online realm, we have to really up our game and our administrative skills. And it feels different. You know, we're used to being in class with our students, talking to them, seeing them face to face and having conversations. We can often track how they're doing in the course or how they feel about the material because we're interacting with them. But now in an online environment, we have to kind of shift our focus to the administrative skills and monitoring reports. And I say this because of academic integrity. You know, one of the things that we have to ensure is that we kind of don't make this easy for students to cheat. The structure of our course correlates to how easy it is to cheat. Some of the courses I taught in early on in my career were designed with static questions and static problems. So all students received the same homework questions. All students received the same exam questions, quiz questions. And what would happen very quickly is those would be posted on Course Hero or Chegg. And so I would see students all of a sudden doing wonderful on their assignments. I actually just had a friend of mine who works in like engineering and chemistry, going through a big investigation because he was like, this student before spring break was struggling, and then after spring break submitted an assignment with 100% and perfect work. And he had to go in and find somebody who had a Chegg account so he could see if his exam had been posted online, and it had been. So some of the things we do when we structure and design courses can make it easy for people to cheat. And in my experience, usually that academic dishonesty occurs because students are trying to reduce the time it takes for them to complete the assignments. Especially right now, considering the facts that people are often at home and their children are at home and they have all of these things going on around them. They may look at their assignments and go, I need to finish this because I need to make dinner for my children. And so sometimes that academic dishonesty would be occurring because they're trying to reduce the time of their assignments. And I often recommend with that, really being careful and considerate when you're choosing your homework assignments and how long it's going to take for students to complete that. So kind of trying to find that good balance of giving them enough problems to be sure that they're learning the content, but not giving them so many problems that they're going to get frustrated. And that's the second reason why I've seen students resort to academic dishonesty, is because they've gotten frustrated with their learning system. And that's two of the things I really enjoyed about using Hawks in my time at UCR, was that Hawks really made it easy for me to identify students that were just saving time, because I could see how much time they were spending on the assignments. It also gave me a lot of data from the students because we did a lot of surveys, and they really did not report a lot of frustration with Hawks. So I didn't see a lot of academic dishonesty. And after a little while, I was able to really drill down and see where are the things that indicate students are being dishonest. And so there's a few helpful reports with that, both for instructor outreach and academic integrity. So there's a great video on the Hawks website that gives you a little bit of insight into search by criteria. It's a report that will allow you to search for students. You can use indicators such as, what is their overall score? I want to look for students whose scores in the course, their overall score is less than 60%. Or maybe on the flip side, I'm looking for academic integrity issues. And so I want to see people who are scoring perfect, like 95 to 100% on the quizzes. Because sometimes those really high scores on quizzes or exams are indicators that perhaps they're not always being academically honest. Another great report was to print or export grades. I liked using that one because it gave me their name and their email address, and then I could kind of select what I was looking for, whether it was the lessons students needed to certify that in that week, or if they had completed the quiz. And then I could use that report to create like a mail merge and send out emails to my students to ask them like, hey, are you struggling? I see you haven't certified in your lessons. They're now late, but you can still complete them. Let me know if you have any questions. And sending out those emails often generated responses from the students, and I was able to connect them with resources or spend some time with them to increase their understanding of those concepts. Sometimes it was the fact that students were skipping straight to certify and never using the learn and practice mode. So that was often the first conversation I would have with them, because I could also look in the reports and see what they were doing on these lessons. And so under academic integrity here, you know, there's a lot of reports about time per lesson, and you can really look in there and see the average times that students are spending on lessons. Are they engaging with learn? Are they engaging with practice? And then how much time are they spending on certify? And that data really kind of gives you an idea of which students are your outliers. And so you kind of have two groups: the ones that may not be being very honest in their work, and oftentimes they're completing things very, very quickly. Like I said, they're trying to reduce the amount of time it takes for them to complete their lessons. Then on the flip side, you have students that are doing things very, very honestly, but they're struggling, and they're spending a lot of time on those lessons. So there are kind of two things you have to look for there. Which students do I need to reach out to because I don't think they're truly spending the time that they need to learn this, and maybe they're using like photo math or Wolfram Alpha to just get the answers rather than really working them out. And then the students that are trying to work everything out and do everything honestly, but for some reason, they just keep hitting roadblocks with their understanding. That being said, you know, summarize time per test question. There's a lot of data in there that you can look at with those web tests and see, you know, are students completing these questions quickly? There's even reports that'll show you if you give a test to all of your students, and you can see which ones they're getting correct and which ones they're not getting correct. And then you can kind of go, oh, I need to provide all of the students with some extra content over this topic. And then, you know, this detailed student grades report is great because if you identify a student that you're concerned about their academic integrity, or you're just concerned that they're really struggling with the content, you can open up their detailed student grades and really get a great overview of everything that they're doing. I was looking at a Q&A that popped up. Yeah, and yeah, so there's a question on here about, I was, you know, observing students who take a lot of time, and you know, their argument being that they kept their computer running while they're doing something. So yeah, that's a great point. Sometimes you're going to see students who open up a lesson and start to work on it, and then their kids come in and distract them, and they just get up and walk away and don't log off of the lesson or the practice problems. And then it looks like they're spending a lot of time on that. And you know, if that, it still opens up that conversation with them. And that's kind of part of one of the next things I'm going to talk about as far as like motivation and persistence, because even if that's all that's happening, they're not really struggling with the material. They just often are kind of opening assignments, working on it, walking around, doing their laundry, coming back and working a little bit more, taking their kids over to play a game, get them started on a TV show, and then coming back and working. Either way, the fact that you've noticed them in this online environment and you reached out to them will have a positive impact on your students. So yeah, sometimes you're going to get false positives where you think somebody might be struggling and they're really not. But either way, it's good to reach out to them. And so, like I said, that brings us to motivation and persistence. So in online courses, there's often a sense of isolation. This isolation is even amplified now because we're all practicing social isolation and social distancing. And the isolation can happen for instructors just as much as it does for our students. And so really, we have to consider that for many of our students, their primary motivation is to pass this gatekeeper course. Some of them are taking these courses because they are going to be science majors or math majors, or they're going to become doctors, and they actually have a passion and interest in the topic. But there's also a portion of our students who are taking this just because it's a major requirement, and to be able to persist in their degree, they have to take this course. So they view it as a gatekeeper course. I am a big proponent of synchronous components to motivate your students to learn and persist. At UCR, that was one of the main goals I had when I took that in-person workshop and put it online, was that I wanted my students to be in these small groups, and they were groups of 20, so they weren't super small, but they weren't large, and they were led by an undergraduate. And the main goal of that, like, the content was great. Math content is very, very valuable, but my main goal was to get the students connected to each other and connected to a person that they could view as sort of a content specialist or helper. Someone who was on their team, like a cheerleader or a coach, to really make them persist and increase their motivation in the course. When you're talking about all of your courses that you may be putting online now, online lectures is an option, although I've heard a lot of different things from different colleges about how they want to do those. But you always have that option to do synchronous office hours and really try to encourage your students to meet with you online. Looks like there was a few questions that popped up. It was my understanding that pauses. Yeah, for Rhea, I would have to defer to the Hawks representative on that one, so I'll wait. How do you ensure that students are not Googling answers during the test? Ava, I have a little bit about that one in a minute. And looking at students' time of usage, is there any concern that this is an invasion of privacy? I think that's a good question, Dell. But I really am unsure what you mean, so I'm going to wait for that one as well. All right, but motivation and persistent is, finding ways to generate that with your students. Emailing them works, replying to discussion board questions if you use that feature in your course. Doing synchronous sessions with your students is a great way to connect to them. And right now we're kind of in a unique situation because probably you are already meeting with your students face-to-face. And so you already have a rapport with them. And what I've experienced is I had a lot of students who were coming into our tutoring center that I knew because I saw them coming in for tutoring and I would talk to them. And I'm trying to get them now connected to our online tutoring. And just last night, one of them joined. And when he heard my voice, he was like, "Hey, it's you. I'm so happy. I missed you. I missed you all so much." And just making them feel that connection, it is just so important to keep them to persist in the course and to increase their motivation. So if you're running a synchronous session, there's a few things that you might need. Some of the basic equipment might be a document camera or a device with a touch screen. If you're really in a pinch, you could use your mouse to draw the math. It takes a little bit of practice, or just simply type stuff on the screen for your students. But a big part of that connection is just that you're talking to them. And so a microphone is important, and a computer. I usually stress a wired internet connection, but given the environment that most of us are probably at home, the Wi-Fi should suffice. But you'll really want to think intentionally about who else is using the Wi-Fi within your home. Because if people are streaming videos, that can really cut down on your internet connection. You'll need a web conferencing software. Zoom, WebEx, Adobe Connect, Skype are some of the major ones. I think a lot of people are using Zoom right now. I know that's what we're using. If you're going to use that, just be very, very mindful of some of the security settings on there to ensure the safety of everyone that's attending that session. Zoom has annotation software, but there are a few devices that don't use it, like Chromebooks. So you may need another annotation software to use. And then what the student needs is a device that they can connect to the internet. Speakers or headphones are really important because if they're talking with you, you don't want their mics to be picking up a lot of feedback. So if they're, I really emphasize headphones or earbuds. If they're using a speaker, it's okay, but they'll probably need to be keeping themselves muted a lot of the time. And then, of course, they'll need to download and install the web conferencing software. Oh, there was a question, I think, about the ideas for helping students to feel connected. And Mara, a big part of that is just when they log in, and everybody has some different things. As you'll notice, I don't have my webcam on. I am not necessarily a proponent of that, but I hear people who swear by webcams. So, and there is that component. If you get your students to join and they all want to share their webcams, sometimes that's a big part of making them feel connected because they see the other people in their class. Just talking about everyday things, asking them how things are going, asking them about their children, getting them to talk to each other, just about music, life, all of that stuff really helps. It's not necessarily about math the whole time to make them feel connected. However, when you're working content with them and you can share things like, hey, let's try to work this problem out. And then they start to see that other people are also struggling with things and it's a learning process and a learning journey for everyone. They feel less distressed with the issues that they may be having. Yeah, when we get towards the end, I'll see if I can show a few annotation software alternatives. All right, accessibility and ADA compliance. Yeah, well, unfortunately, Dale, I'm only working with the mic I had at home, so I'm sorry if there are any issues with that. And sometimes my Southern accent is kicking in, so I'll try my best to not have issues with my speaking. But unfortunately, I've been working over 12 hours a day for 20 days in a row, so I'm really sorry about that. Access to technology. It's a big concern in general when we decide to make a course online. And in this situation, it can even be of greater concern because we had to make a radical switch very quickly. I know at Chaffey College, they invested a lot of money in buying Chromebooks and laptops and other equipment, such as mobile hotspots, so that students are able to access the online content. And I often bring up availability of alternative resources, but even now that can be something that's difficult because a lot of places are closed. So where in the past you might tell a student, go to your local library or go to a Starbucks and use the Wi-Fi, those are not necessarily options. So we'll just do our best effort, but we do need to always consider that the students' access to technology may be limited at times. ADA compliance is very, very important. It's very similar to universal design principles. With the fact that we took these classes online from an in-person environment, you should already know if you have any students that may be hearing impaired and will need to rely on closed captioning. You probably also know if you have students who are visually impaired and will need screen readable lecture notes or scalable images. You want to be sure that your learning system is also compliant, which should have been something you were already concerned about prior to a switch to online. My understanding is that Hawks is fully compliant, I believe, in all of their courses now. And then, one of the biggest things that we often had to do was provide extended time on tests. So in the short term, ADA compliance needs, you may take those potentially on a good faith base-to-base effort, case-to-case effort. But if you're going to move forward and keep your instruction online for the summer or fall, you really want to think about these things. And if you have a department at your school that's dedicated to disabilities and compliance with the ADA laws, you'll want to talk to them to be sure that the content that you're sharing with your students is meeting those requirements. With an online course, there's always constant evaluation. One thing I found was when I did synchronous lectures, I started off with attendance, but attendance, people can log on to the Zoom and walk away. So instead, I made it a participation requirement. I spent a lot of time on the learning management system and changing the structure of it to make sure that it flowed well for students and they were able to understand and access everything that they needed. I addressed some of the things with academic integrity, such as, students Googling questions on the quizzes, by making show work quizzes. So the students had to write down their work for the quiz and submit it in a timely manner. So if they submitted the quiz at 1:00 a.m., I would have expected the work to be turned in by 1:15 a.m. so that I knew that they didn't have enough time to just answer the questions on the quiz and then spend a whole bunch of time getting the work to be correct. Reaching out to the students and at times restructuring the way that my lessons were designed in Hawks really made a big difference with academic integrity, because sometimes the students believe that they know the content really well, especially if it's something they saw in high school. So they'll cut corners and complete their work dishonestly by Googling answers or using photo math. And sometimes they really needed that talk from me to tell them, please don't do that. You can't watch a basketball video with LeBron James and then after you watch that video think, I can go out and dunk the basketball, and so you can't, watch somebody in batting practice hit the baseball and then just go, okay, now I can go out there and play baseball. It's the same with math. You can watch people do math problems and understand it while you're watching it, but that doesn't mean that you've practiced it. So I really emphasized to those students that they needed to practice. I also found that students didn't always read the syllabus the syllabus the way that I wanted them to. So I instituted a syllabus quiz that they had to complete in Hawks before they could do any other work in Hawks. They had to make a 100% on it. That really cut down on the number of emails that I was getting from students. And then I started using the question builder to add questions to the content that I felt would make the learning process better for my students. And then you're always going to run into technology issues, whether it's cookies on the computer that are making something not load for the student, or they have spotty internet, so they're trying to join your synchronous office hours, but they keep getting disconnected. So, those issues are going to come up. but you'll just have to spend time evaluating them and trying to find ways to address them as best as possible. So that's the end of what I had prepared. I see there's quite a few questions here. So I see Dell asked, looking at a student's time of usage, is there any concern this is an invasion of privacy? You know, I never felt like I was invading their privacy, but I do see why you would ask that question. And so it is one for me to ponder a bit. I don't know if it's invading their privacy any more than when I'm watching them take a test. You know, I'm paying attention to them in person when they're taking an exam. But I do understand that there are a lot of components, whether it's the learning management system or the homework system, that tracks the student time. You know, and perhaps it could be perceived as an invasion of privacy. I've never had anybody feel that way. I don't think that the students, I never really called them out on their time per se, because I don't think they actually realized that the time they spent on stuff was how I knew they were struggling, or how I knew that they may have been using techniques that were dishonest. Yeah, there's a few drawing pad alternatives out there. I typically recommend tablets, because a tablet has a touch screen on it and you're able to write and see what you're writing while you're doing it. Some of the drawing pads, I think, take a little bit extra time to learn, because you don't see what you're drawing while you're drawing it. But if you practice with it, everyone says it's very helpful. You know, if you wanted to email me, I could probably send you a couple of products that I've heard of or had people use that they reported as helpful. Yeah, and when you're trying to help get the students to feel connected in the math class, as I said before, some of it's just talking about their day-to-day lives, giving them some space to talk. I mean, if you think about your in-person lectures, when students would come to class, you know, they tend to start to get to know each other. They talk with each other about their lives. If you're an active learner proponent, if that you really believe active learning is important for students, if you're using Zoom, you can take the students and then put them in breakout rooms in groups, and then have them work on problems. There are a lot of like polling softwares like Socrative and Poll Everywhere. So you could put them in breakout groups and then have them as a group like complete a little quiz. Just, you know, I think they call it a space race in Socrative, you know, and then kind of breed some of that competition with them, but also get them to work in groups together that build some rapport and connection. Let's see, Robin said, show work is great, but what about these apps that only show the answer, but the work steps right? Yeah, I know, Robin. It is challenging, because you really, if you're trying your best to really get the students to not use those types of things where they have to, where they can like take a picture or type the problem in and they get the answer and they get the work, you know, at times there's limits to what we can do. If your school has anything that's like a proctoring software for especially for exams or quizzes or final exams that are high stakes, like they're worth a large percentage of the student's grade, using that proctoring software could be a way that you're able to prevent students from doing that, because those softwares often either use video recordings to indicate times where students might be doing something, like bending their head down to look at a tablet, you know, or some of them are actually watched by a live person. And they also usually have lockdown browsers, but that lockdown browser wouldn't prevent a student from using an alternate device to look something up. But the recording is there so you can see if a student is looking at something else to fill out their work and their answer. So there are some things you could do with proctoring software. I would definitely say from my experience, Robin, the majority of students really do want to learn the work and want to make an effort to complete things honestly. A few of them rely on this kind of need of, I just need to get through the problems and I just need to work it. And oftentimes what I found was the outreach to them and having to talk with them about why doing that was not the way to be successful tended to help. And then there was a very small portion of students that I found no matter what I did, I just could not get them to understand that cheating was not going to make them successful. I had a student who took the workshop, cheated on all of his assignments, had a great grade going into the final, came in and made like a 20% on the final exam. And then he somehow convinced the school to let him retake the workshop, which is like a very small percentage of people, they let him retake it. So they let him retake it, and then he came in and I sat him down and I was like, you can't do that again. You've got to do your work honestly so that you're going to be able to be successful on the final exam. He did not listen to me, and he even tried to get another student to take his final exam for him. But we check IDs, so we knew that the other student was not him. And then he came in and he did the same thing. He tried to, I had to watch him the whole test because he tried to look at other people's papers. I didn't end up reporting him because whenever they don't pass this workshop, they lose their major. And so I felt that that was punishment enough. You know, and so it's just sometimes no matter what I did with students, I just could not get them to be honest. But I would say it was like 80 or 90% of them just defaulted to being honest. And then 5% of them were being dishonest because they were just trying to save time and had a false sense of confidence of their understanding of the material. And then there was maybe another 5% that were in this awkward space where they thought that they could cheat successfully throughout the whole course and that nobody was watching them. That's part of it. They think nobody's watching them. But if you're keeping up with what they're doing and reaching out to them and talking to them, that tends to cut down on those students from trying to cheat because they feel like they got caught. And so they tend to back away from doing those things. I don't know if I really over answered your question, Robin. The short answer is just, you know, at a certain point in time, there's only so much we can do to encourage our students to complete the work honestly. You know, some of them, a small percentage of them are always going to look for a way around. Francine, to caption math, yes, Dragon is a Dragon Naturally Speaking, I believe is the name of the software. And it's a software that when you talk, it captures your words and it types them out for you. So, you know, there are a lot of different things you can use to do closed captioning, or you could even hand do them yourself. But that's a great point, Francine, that if you are able to get Dragon Naturally Speaking, you could just do your lecture videos and it would automatically provide the text for you. So it would be much easier to provide the closed captioning, whether it's a synchronous lecture or just a video that you're creating for your students. All right, let's see. We have Balaram, I believe is how you say your name. What's your advice to reduce cheating in homeworks and tests? You know, part of it is, I think when you get that connection with the students and you've really provided them with that process and understanding of how those things need to be done, that helps. Like I said, I really believe most students default to doing the work honestly. And from my experience, they sometimes have to have a bit of an understanding of the math to sometimes know even how to use these apps to get the answer that you're looking for. If they don't even know what a quadratic equation is and that you're solving an equation, then if they go to try to use an app to get the answer, they don't know what to select. Or if you're asking them just to simplify something, sometimes they'll go and get an app and it'll solve the equation and they don't understand why that doesn't work. So, you know, it really just, you have to default and believe that the majority of your students are going to want to complete this work honestly, just like with the in-person classes. Most of your students want to do their homework and want to learn the content. You know, and a big part of it is if you have the ability to do proctored exams, that really helps because you can emphasize when they're doing homework, you need to do this homework the same way that you would do it for the test, because on the test is going to be proctored, you know. And if you tell them, you know, on the test you can't use notes, on the test you can't use a calculator, you know, on the test you can't Google stuff. So when you do your homework, do them the same way. And often that helps. Let's see here. Does Chaffey provide or allow the use of Microsoft Teams for online classes? Teams is said to be more secure than Zoom. That's a great question, Perva. I know that I recently downloaded Microsoft and the Teams component. I haven't really used it, and I don't know if there are very, very many people at Chaffey using it. I would say, from my knowledge with Chaffey, they're pretty open to, especially for faculty, to use what you believe is your best discretion. My understanding is that Teams is more secure than Zoom. You know, because we had to do a lot of work over these past few weeks to make Zoom secure. So yeah, if you have the ability to use Microsoft Teams and you feel comfortable with that, you know, it would probably be something that you would want to do. Brent is saying, we started using a syllabus quiz and HOGS last semester and generated it from student FAQs. It is a great tool. Yeah, I'm totally right there with you, Brent. I was getting email after email after email, and oftentimes the questions the students were asking me were in like the first few lines of the syllabus. And it was very frustrating because I want my students to read the syllabus and I only have so much time in the day. So eventually I was like, okay, sort of a similar thing. I went through and saw what were they commonly asking me, and then I built a syllabus quiz around that, and it like significantly reduced the number of emails I got. So it's definitely a very useful tool. If you can develop a syllabus quiz that students take right at the beginning of the class, and even in this environment where your students have just been transitioned, if you have new online expectations that you want your students to know, line out those expectations with the students and then make a quiz about it to really try to drive home those things so that the students understand it. Ria said, I am holding group quizzes via Zoom. I put the students in breakout rooms and then travel from room to room to answer questions. I require them to have their audio and video turned on. Then I have them submit their work to me through our LMS. There is an app called Cam Scanner. Yeah, that's a great one. That is great for taking those pictures and making them a PDF form. I think that that's a great idea, Ria. If you're able to, find ways to get your students to take these and kind of do your own proctoring, that's really great, because some of the proctoring software actually costs money for the students. Sometimes schools have deals with the services like ProctorU or Proctorio or Examity. But if your school doesn't really have a deal with them that the student doesn't have to pay it, then that can be a financial burden on the student. Whereas if you're able to have everybody sign on to Zoom at the same time, you put them in breakout rooms and you kind of hop around to monitor them. So you kind of are proctoring their exam. They never know when you're going to pop in, right? Then you keep them honest in a way. And you can see when they have questions, because that's another thing with in-person tests. If you're like me, I would often walk around the room and sometimes students would have a question and I would realize, oh yeah, the way I wrote that problem, maybe it was a little confusing. And then I might be able to make an announcement out to all of the students. Or I would know that when I hopped around to the different rooms, like in your scenario, if a student asked you about question number 3 and you saw that it could potentially be confusing, then when you're hopping around, you would know to tell them. And then you would have that ability, like you said, to get them to upload their work. So that's a great idea. Regarding academic integrity from Dean. How can you find out if your materials are posted on Course Hero or Chegg? If they are posted, I don't think you can get them taken down. Usually with Course Hero, you won't necessarily, and even maybe with Chegg, you won't necessarily be able to really see them. But usually if you copy and paste in Google your question, you'll get an idea if it's out there. With Chegg, my friend who I mentioned earlier, he suspected that his student had copied the answers from somewhere online, and he actually had to find somebody who had a paid account to get them to go in and find it for him. So there are some, I have a lot of issues with Chegg just because I don't even understand how they could exist. But, that's me personally. I mean, there is a component where I can understand that being able to see how some work done may be beneficial to students when they're learning. But in general, it seems like something that causes the students to rely on, I need to see it worked out before I can work it out myself, rather than really encouraging students to be creative in their problem solving process. So in general, most of the time, if you copy and paste questions in, you can get an idea. If you're using something like Hawks, one thing that's great is their problems use a lot of different number values in it. So even if a student saw the work for that problem with numbers X, Y, Z, and then their problem has the numbers A, B, C, they still have to figure out how the problem with the letter, numbers X, Y, Z in it worked, so that they can apply that to the problem with A, B, C in it. So that's why I really encourage to stay away from static problems. One of the schools I worked for had static problems, and I had to consistently redesign and repost those questions because they were being posted on Course Hero within 1 or 2 terms. So if you can use something that has random or somewhat randomly generated values in it, that really makes it more difficult for students to rely on something like that. let's see, in regards to showing work quizzes, I'm experimenting with explain your steps where students have to say, I'm sorry, I'm reading this one kind of to myself, aren't I? In regards to showing work quizzes, I'm experimenting with explain your steps where students have to say why they multiplied by blank. Why is this form better? Using words like factor, combine like terms, FOIL, and using them correctly. Just started, so don't know if it will be, yeah, Andrew, and that's a great idea. You know, it's something I've thought about a lot if I ever was going to teach a class again, that I would really want to emphasize the work that the students were doing, an explanation of the steps that they did, or even if they got the problem incorrect, if they were just able to identify, like, I worked this out and I think I have a mistake, but I'm not sure where the mistake is. Like, for me, that's valuable. That you work the problem out and you don't feel like you had the correct answer. That shows that you're making a concerted effort in that problem solving process. So hopefully that'll work out for you. I think it probably will, because it really gets the students to think a little bit more about what they're doing and not just to write down steps. So I hope that works out well for you, Andrew. Looks like we got maybe 7 minutes left. When I give a test, should I explicitly say, do not use your book, notes, the internet, etc.? Or should I just not say either way? Jenna, usually I was pretty emphatic about that, especially when it came to like books or notes. You know, sometimes students feel like using their notes or their book is okay because they're just doing their test at home and it's helping them learn it. And you know, I can understand that, but if you're going to give them an exam that's proctored at the end and they're not going to be able to use their books or notes, then that will really be detrimental to them. So I think it helps to make that statement. How much it helps, again, it might be a small percentage, but I think every small percentage of students that you're able to encourage them not to use those resources is very helpful. Miriam, an example of an annotation software that I typically like to use was called Annotator, and it was by IPEVO. That was the one that I found to be easiest to use. IPEVO is a company that makes document cameras and some other resources for instruction. So it's IPEVO, and their software is called Annotator. I've heard a lot of people who also use like Notability on iPads. I think you have to pay for that app, but I mean, I've heard great things about it and I've seen great demonstrations with it. I just don't personally own an iPad. Joyce, without their webcams on, how can you actually know they're there? Yeah, that's a great question. So when we did the, kind of 20-to-1 lab components, the way we knew they were participating was we used the chat. So I informed my lab leaders that they needed to be sure the students were participating. So ask them questions or ask them to work out example problems, and then they had to put them in the chat. That was how we did it. And I believe it worked pretty well most of the time. There were some flaws in it, but it's definitely true that if you have their webcam on, you'll know if they're there. So if you like the use of webcams and all of your students have webcams, it is a great way to ensure that they're participating. Mara asked, how have you inserted math learning or study skills in online courses? That's a great question. In the workshops that I did at UCR and in past courses, I think I did that more on a basis of just talking and communicating with my students. If I was using discussion boards, trying to emphasize to them important ways that they could do that. With my current position, our Math Success Center and many of the success centers at Chaffey College offer a lot of workshops about growth mindset, study skills, test taking strategies, time management. So if you have resources like that at your campus that you can direct students to, that would help. You know, but there are a lot of different things you could do. You could even just start incorporating like one question on a quiz that has to do with what were the study strategies that you used this week, or, you know, maybe asking them an open-ended question about what they would like from you to help them with their time management or study skills. You know, so you could think about it creatively, but I think I did it a little bit more organically in the past. Kevin said, I've been torn on the idea of participation or credit for adult students. Have you tried removing this requirement and observing whether they simply step up on their own learning? From my experience, they take a short collaboration period and then adjust to a growth mindset quickly. Yes, Kevin, when we first did it, I mostly just made the attendance or participation grade extra credit, and then I just made it a quiz grade. So they had like 6 quizzes in the class, and then the 7th quiz was their lab participation, and I dropped the lowest quiz grade, and I just told my students, you know, if you don't want to go to the lab, don't go to the lab, but you'll get a 0 on that one. You just need to be sure you take all of your quizzes. Most of them will go to the lab, but I never did it where there was no component. So, you know, but I do agree with you. I think for the majority of students, even if you didn't make a grade component for participation or attendance, most of them will step up and attend the lab. Or even if you only made it required like that first week, you know, after that, they'll probably continue. So it looks like we are kind of out of time. Is that correct, Danny?
That is correct. And
right.
Yes, thank you so much. That was a very robust question and answer session. So Professor Holdiness, we appreciate all of your knowledge and sharing it with us today. And I also want to give a big thank you to our audience for being so engaged, joining in, commenting all throughout the question and answer session. That was really appreciated. We will be sending you a link to this recording. So if you want to rewatch part of it, we will make that available to you. If you do have any other questions, you heard something that you're interested in and want to learn more about today, you can always email us at marketing@hawkslearning.com. And just one more big thank you to you, Professor Holdiness.
Oh, you're very welcome. Time to get back to work.
Okay, take care and everybody have a great day.
Thank you.